education. This is a question that we as Teachers for Climate often stumble across in our discussions with teachers, students, school leaders, and policymakers. When it comes to sustainability and climate education, implementation often depends on individual enthusiasm, and understandings in practice currently seem to be quite disparate and very often do not capture the depth and urgency of the challenges we are facing now and in the future. Too often, sustainability is reduced to installing a few solar panels on the roof of a school building or a fun lesson on the plastic soup. There does not seem to be a coherent vision and a structural approach that holds the promise to genuinely pave the way to a sustainable future. This is why we have undertaken this work to articulate our vision of sustainability education in the hopes of providing a coherent framework based on understandings distilled from research and practice. I was hoping to have some slides today.
Okay.
So our core message is basically that in order to move towards transformative and regenerative actions to save the planet, major shifts in reference points, worldviews, and underlying values are needed. A paradigm shift really is needed in how we view and live our relationship with the rest of the planet and with each other as humans. We problematize mainstream notions of sustainable development rooted in a human-centric, instrumental view of the planet, see references to nature only as natural resources even in the SDGs, and in one, namely Western-centric, linear view of development, translated as economic growth. These are notions that end up reinforcing the harmful patterns that have led to the interconnected crises facing us and the planet. We argue instead for a deeper understanding of planetary sustainability rooted in an ecocentric worldview and models of planetary justice, where humans view themselves as one part of the greater ecosystem, recognize the intrinsic value of all living and non-living elements of the system, have an awareness of the interconnectedness and interdependence of all parts of the system, and aim to live in harmony with the rest of nature. To transform mindsets, education needs to build on the principles of transformative, even transgressive learning. Learning which encourages transformations of worldviews and values, as well as placing explicit emphasis on social action and agency, and seeking to disrupt norms and structures which maintain an unsustainable status quo. We need a holistic approach to education that focuses on educating the whole person on the cognitive, physical, emotional, social, civic levels, educating for the world or the planet, and focuses on the entire learning ecosystem, not only parts of it. Learning in and with nature and the community is central in cultivating an ecocentric mindset and a deeper sense of planetary sustainability and justice. In the face of unprecedented and interconnected challenges and the rapidly changing world, education needs to empower students to cope with complexity and uncertainty and critically reflect on their role in the greater ecosystem. To do so, education needs to be genuinely inclusive of a plurality of perspectives, talents, approaches, and knowledges, in the plural. The ultimate goal of education in this vision becomes that of cultivating planetary citizenship, which encompasses a set of principles, values, attitudes, and habits that reveal a new perception of Earth as a single community. What the planet needs is citizens who can think and feel ecologically, understand the interconnectedness and interdependence of human and natural systems, and are conscious of their role in the greater ecosystem. Citizens who have an ethic of care for all life on the planet and the sense of responsibility towards and solidarity with all elements of the ecosystem. Citizens who are resilient and can build authentic hope that can combine criticality and action as they face desperate challenges, and who have the will, ability, and courage
to act and to protect, in order to protect and restore the well-being of the planetary ecosystem now and in the future. To achieve this goal, the principles that we have highlighted need to be translated into the curriculum, the pedagogical approaches, and into the culture and environment of the school. And this is what our model tries to capture in a relational way. We do not have time to go into the details of the model tonight, so we'll aim to just provide you with a bigger picture. Some of the better known aspects, we think better known, will not be discussed. And we'll just highlight a couple of the possibly more distinctive features, although it should be noted that strength lies in the holistic and integrated relational framework that we are proposing rather than in isolated pieces. The panel discussion, however, will also provide an opportunity to go more in depth into some of the ideas underlying our vision. So moving to one of the leaves of our model, curriculum, we argue that curriculum frameworks should be holistic, designed to develop not just knowledge and skills, but values, attitudes, dispositions, mindsets on the cognitive, emotional, social, civic levels. And they should link learning and action by design, not just as an add-on or afterthought. Another principle that we would like to highlight here is inclusivity, plurality, and flexibility. We argue not simply for including multiple perspectives as possibly interesting yet exotic other views, but for truly decolonizing the curriculum in a way that includes and does justice to a plurality of perspectives and knowledge systems while naming and critically examining the mainstream one. We should find in the curriculum different ways of knowing, including listening to the excluded voice of nature and the other than human, different ways of seeing the future, and different ways of being and relating. One aspect we consider to be key is the explicit focus on ethical learning through the exploration of a range of ethical approaches and the explicit exploration of inequity, power relations, social and climate justice. Moving on to pedagogy, we argue for world-centered education. So here we depart from the usual teacher-learner dichotomy in defining what or who the learning and teaching should be centered on. And we argue for education for the world or for the planet, following Vista, Andreotti, and others. This is supported, for example, by eco-pedagogies, and this is something we'll hear about more from one of our guest speakers tonight. Critical pedagogies, pedagogies of hope, ethical global issues pedagogies, and action learning. Indeed, we argue for the importance of action-oriented pedagogies and authenticity in the learning journey. Applying learning to address real-life challenges in authentic contexts, learning in and with the community on change-related initiatives, moving reciprocally from theory to practice and from practice to theory, and valuing both equally. Learning in and through social and natural environments is supported by pedagogies such as action learning, participatory action, community-engaged learning, and so on. In this context, it will be crucial to embrace pedagogical approaches that focus on cultivating connection with nature, such as place-based pedagogies, vernacular learning, outdoors learning, emotional and somatic learning, and others. And I would like to quote from one of the researchers that's influenced our thinking here, David Selby. It is a sense of oneness with nature that is likely to translate into transformative action and transformed ways of being in the world. We only stir ourselves to protect what we have come to love, and thus cultivating a sense of oneness with nature is vital if we are to have any chance of transforming the global environmental condition. Passion is the harbinger of activism. And finally, school environment and culture. Here we won't go into any detail, really, but only say that the paradigm shift that we're looking for must be embodied in the school culture and environment. The principles we have highlighted must be translated, modeled in how people relate to one another and with their surroundings within and beyond the school in ecosystems of learning and support. So to conclude, I would just like to point out that by proposing this model, we don't intend to impose a blueprint, nor should this be seen as an add-on or something else educators have to do. Rather, we intend to open up space for collaboration, inspiration, and experimentation, and to provide a hopefully coherent framework within which decisions can be made at the policy level, at the school level, at the classroom level. We see this really as the beginning of a conversation, and we expect that the model will continue to evolve with contributions from the community of educators. So, having outlined our vision in very broad strokes, we will now move on to the panel discussion, which will provide an opportunity to go more in depth into some of the ideas underlying our vision.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camelia.
I'm just looking around because we have guests both here and online. So
Camelia has really been the driving force and the main thinker behind this model. So well done, thank you so much. I would like to ask Bas to join me on the stage. We have three panelists who are all three researchers into transformative education for sustainability. And we are very, very excited to have them with us today. We've got Professor Arjen Wals from Wageningen University. He's Professor of Transformative Learning for Socio-Ecological Sustainability. He's also the UNESCO Chair in Social Learning and Sustainable Development. He will be joining us on Zoom from Norway. Yeah, I know, it's some very exciting things he's doing, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Dr. Greg William, Misiaszek. Yes. Assistant Professor of Beijing Normal University in the Faculty of Education, Institute of Educational Theories, and Associate Director of Paulo Freire Institute. He's also the writer of the book called Eco-Pedagogy. And we have Bas van den Berg here live. He's a PhD candidate, but he's also the Director of Education for Mission Zero at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. He's the co-lead of leadership for the Circular Transitions and the National Hackathon Circular Economy. So welcome. I'm looking at Carlos to see if we have connection with Zoom. And whether we can see our guests. Yes. Arjen, welcome. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. Your computer seems to be on mute, Arjen. Maybe you can unmute. Ja? Kun je iets zeggen? Arjen? Nee, we horen je nog steeds niet. Nou, ik zal even vertellen waar Arjen vandaan belt. Then I'll explain a bit about where Arjen is calling from. He is in Norway, where he is currently on a sabbatical, and he's helping 4 schools to implement the whole school approach to sustainability. And he told me today he had a very exciting day in the mountains. I was quite jealous. It sounded really beautiful, but he just arrived at this hotel, I assume, where it looks like he's got good Wi-Fi. Welcome, Arjen. Yeah, we still cannot hear you. Yeah, perhaps, Carlos, shall I move to Greg for now? Oh. Arjen? No, we still cannot hear you. Yeah, okay, Greg, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you too. That is wonderful. Then perhaps
good.
I will start with the question I have for you. Welcome and thank you so much. You are joining us from Canada at the moment, and we are very grateful that you are here with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. You write about transformative sustainability education, and I would like to ask you, you question education for sustainable development. Maybe you would like to explain the difference you see between education for sustainable development and transformative sustainability education.
Yeah, once again, thank you for having me. I think I could probably talk on this for a couple hours, and no one wants to listen to that. But I think overall, the aspect is really trying to question and re-question, this aspect of how do we define development? Development for who? And who does development, especially in a more globalized world, how is it, who benefits from that and who suffers from that? And looking at it through, not only what's happening currently, but the histories of oppressions and colonialization and so on, racism. And I think this aspect of transformative, there's many different aspects of it, but and I focus a lot on eco-pedagogy, this aspect of trying to really problematize who it's development for, especially with this aspect of globalizations, with a contested train from both globalization from above, from below, things like that. So is globalization going just towards increasing development for to increase hegemony, and in this aspect of sustainability, what is the baseline of sustainability are we reaching for? Are we reaching for this aspect of how the world is currently, or how the world was previously? And are we looking at things like social justice, environmental justice, and planetary sustainability beyond humans, beyond the Anthroposphere? Sorry for my pronunciation. I'm not that good at the actual pronunciation, but looking at the well-being of nature in itself. So I think I'll stop there, because I know I can keep on talking. So
thank you very much.
I'll stop with that. Short.
But that's a clear picture, and that does make us think. Thank you so much. I think, Wals, I would like to ask you a question. Perhaps you would like to explain a bit more of your understanding of the need for transformative education, and how we could, as teachers or as people working in education, actually implement that.
Well, that's definitely a big question. So I think in terms of the first part, it's very clear from all of the climate science data, and also I think just by talking to people now, that the way that we relate to the world around us is damaging in multiple ways. So both in terms of biodiversity loss, but also psychologically. Look at young people, for example, like 60% of them have some form of eco-anxiety because of the way that they perceive the future. So the need for it seems to be quite strongly and clearly there. The second part about what we can do with it, honestly, it's probably more than most of us think, but there's a few things that are really important. And one of them is that you have a really strong ecosystem of support, particularly from educational managers and administrators, because working in transformative sustainability ways, or what I like to call regenerative educational ways, it's not easy. It also asks a lot from us as educators to open up, to be flexible, to engage in learning that can go all over the, wherever you want to go, all over the place. And particularly in primary and secondary education, there's also a severe lack of space in educational structures to engage in that type of way, because you have a very well-defined, too well-defined in ways, curriculum, even though the way you can teach that curriculum, and that's something that Greg, I believe, can tell you a lot more about than me, could still be revamped with eco-pedagogical ways or alternative forms of pedagogy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for underlining the urgency. And I liked how you quoted that 60% of young people feel some kind of form of eco-anxiety. As a teacher, it really breaks my heart. And I think you all recognize this as teachers. This is obviously why you came. we recognize this and we feel this, and this hurts because we are teachers, because we want to help students. I'm looking at Carlos. How's the connection with Arjen?
Check on his mic.
Okay, Arjen, is there anything you can do to check your mic, your microphone?
How about now?
Yeah! You get a cheer from everybody here.
I got rid of my headset.
Okay, that helps. Thank you so much for making time for us, and welcome. Did you have a beautiful day in Norway?
Yeah, just hiked up a mountain, back down in the valley. Recorded a small video on the way.
Okay.
For some students in Wageningen. Yeah.
Ah, great. You are actually a professor in transformative learning for socio-ecological and sustainability. Could you please explain what that means and what the need is for that?
Well, the transformative indeed refers to the need to, rather than optimize the current education system, which is deeply rooted in what I would call reductionist ways of thinking and in promoting efficiency and excellence and maybe very much preoccupied with growth, also with personal growth, that needs to be transformed or maybe transitioned towards an education that is more mindful, more connected, more relational, and not just concerned with expansion, growth, and developing careers, but finding a better and more meaningful equilibrium on this earth. The socio-ecological refers, I think it's intentionally chosen that to emphasize that economic has dominated education, economic thinking and efficiency, accountability thinking. And the socio-ecological has been neglected in a way. I think our education has become an extension of the globalizing economy. I think Greg is referring to that too. In some ways you could say all education is education for sustainability in one way or another. There's a whole hidden curriculum of unsustainability. There are lots of values that we teach in our schools that have to do with taking care of yourself, individualism, competition. And those are values that have influence on how we live on this earth. So all education is in a way sustainability education. Some teachers say, well, it's not part of what I do, but it is. In very subliminal ways, we reproduce certain values that tend to favor economic, utilitarian ways of thinking. And this is where transformative learning for socio-ecological sustainability, and note I use sustainability and not sustainable development, even though the SDGs are, I think, helpful in getting lots of schools and governments engaged in sustainability. The notion of sustainable development indeed can be seen as problematic, as Greg has said. I think the question is, what is it that we need to sustain in this world, and what do we need to disrupt in this world? So sustainability has to do with sustaining and disrupting, and maybe also with development at times, and innovation, but not all the time. And indeed, this can start at a very young age. I think in early childhood education, children are much better in seeing relationships and connections, and they don't see the world in disciplines or reduce it in categories or boxes. We are teaching that later. As they get older, they lose that ability to see holes and connections. So we also need to unlearn in a way, and I think we need to have a more pedagogical approach to education in general, with more attention for learning how to be and how to become and live more lightly and more equitably on this earth without compromising the possibilities for others to do so in the future.
Yeah, wow. Thank you very much for putting that so well. I'm feeling very excited about hearing all of this. Yeah, it really resonates with the discussions we've had in Teachers for Climate. I would like to ask Greg another question. Greg, you've written the book on eco-pedagogy, and you argue that we need a paradigm shift in order to teach and critically deepen and widen our understanding of the socio-environmental connections for transformative actions to save Earth. What exactly is eco-pedagogy, and how does it fit in to a transformative approach to sustainability education?
Thank you for the question. Let me try to answer that within just 2 minutes or so. I'm very bad at, I think like most professors, I'm bad at condensing my words, but I'll try. So eco-pedagogy, the aspect that I look at it from is this aspect of, it's a reinvention of the work of the Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire. And it's this aspect of problematizing education, of this aspect of having, of giving a problem within the classroom and trying to figure out how what the world and Earth currently is, using hope to figure out what you want to see the world and rest of nature be, and what is that gap between the two. And like you said previously, this aspect of, you know, it's that anxiety within the classroom, and one of the key things is this aspect of hope and this utopia of education, that a lot of education, Freire argued this and many other scholars, that, you know, that this fatalistic notion, and that's why education a lot of times is oppressive, because it doesn't show the possibility of being able to transform the world. But also within eco-pedagogy, it's recognizing that it's sustainability, nature. So as we develop a lot of times problematically, you know, it's this aspect of the rest of nature adapting and evolving. And it's this aspect that us, Freire talked about this aspect of us as unique human beings that have futures, that can, that have histories, that can look upon our histories, our reflectivity. That's one of the aspects that makes a lot of times humans unique from other beings, but it's also the cause for unsustainability. How do we define development? How can we have development where we don't even need the word sustainability? And, you know, development shouldn't be just growth, like Arjen and many others have said. So eco-pedagogy a lot of times is this teaching to be able to read. Freire talks about to read the world, to read and reread the world, to try to understand it. So when students get new information, that they'll be able to critically, dialectically, from multiple perspectives, try to understand an environmental issue. How does environmental violence connect to social violence? How does environmental violence connect to planetary unsustainability and dominance, and all these different factors? So if we are to use the word development, and it is a very problematic term, how we understand that within more of that everyone, you know, can live a peaceful life, and but also this aspect of sustainability. So it's this aspect of teaching to read rather than being more focused on, you know, the accountability and efficiency, which everyone talked about, and systems of that accountability and efficiency is wonderful, but a lot of when it goes into this aspect of extreme accountability, efficiency, and especially going under the frameworks of neoliberalism, that's where it becomes problematic, that everything is connected back to economics, and economics that is unjustly unfair, unsustainable. So I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that gives a bit of a summarization.
Yes, thank you. I think you did well. That made a lot of sense. And I liked what you said about hope, and I think it links to something in our model called, what mentioned, active hope. But also eco-literacy, which I think links a lot to what you were talking about, being able to read the world and how things are connected. Thank you very much. Bas, your work focuses a lot on regenerative education. Would you be able to explain a bit more what regenerative education is, and how perhaps we can, as teachers, implement that in our classrooms?
in schools?
I can give it a try, and I think the others can also add a lot to that. Yeah, so it's derived from regenerative design, which it has a bit of a history, but particularly with the work from Bill Reed, where essentially we say, well, we don't just need sustainability because we have to actively take part in restoring or healing certain parts of the world that have already been environmentally degraded, where people have been unjustly harmed by violence, either from environmental destruction or from other people. So currently, I like to say, well, regenerative education is the appropriate participation in healing of places and selves. So participating in systems in ways that could lead to better future possibilities. So very much akin with what the others have already said. And with that comes a lot of uncertainty because you're working in complex adaptive systems which you cannot control, but you may be able to guide the direction a little bit. The way to appropriately participate in that is going to be very different depending on the context. If you're working with primary education students, that's obviously going to be a different type of engagement as if you're working with master students. What you're seeing now a lot in tertiary education is like living labs or field labs or challenge labs, places where education, government, business people, artists, etc., come together to try and tackle complex or even wicked challenges. And that's one of the ways to do it. And with that, it's very important that it's not just about trying to learn to tackle or to learn beyond some of those systemic challenges, but also seeing it as both an inside out and an outside in process. So it's about working to change external reality, while also facilitating the transformation that's happening within. So it's both psychology in a way and design or action. And that's really challenging. There's not a lot of teachers who can do both, or not a lot of teacher teams who are ready to do both.
Thank you very much. I like that focus, and I think that resonates with what Greg also said, of both on the world outside, but also on personal growth within, and both are so important. And I was also thinking and looking at the people from Stichting Technotrend and your Young Innovators program that tries to do a bit of that, right? Combine people from all aspects of society into learning in schools, which is great. Arjen, I've got one more question for you. As I said, you are in Norway at the moment, supporting 4 schools with implementing the whole school approach. Perhaps you can explain a little bit more about what it is that you do and how, and perhaps if you have any tips for us as educators on how to bring sustainability into a whole school and to make sure we get schools that breathe sustainability, that includes the school environment and the school culture.
Yeah, well, the whole school approach is a more integral approach to addressing sustainability challenges, in the sense that it is, in the past, we've seen all kinds of educations. I call them planetary educations, like health education, citizenship education, human rights education, development education, peace education, water education, environmental education, nature conservation education, etc., etc. All important, and all these educations have representatives in society trying to get schools to adopt their education and say, this is really important, biodiversity is critical, water, soils, human rights, etc., etc. That's the add-on approach. And schools, rightfully so, say we're already overloaded with many tasks, and we are trying to meet the national curriculum requirements, and that's and we have to do the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, science, etc. So we cannot do all that. So the whole school approach is saying basically, we should not try to overload schools with societal problems. We need to look at what are the competencies young people need today, and how can we become, as a school, more responsive and more relevant. More responsive in light of the changing world, and more relevant in light of the pressing sustainability issues that require a new way of thinking and doing. And this new way of thinking has to do with, well, what I said earlier, seeing connections and relations and using the local environment and the life world of the students as a starting point for learning. The whole sustainability puzzle is around the corner. I think we only need to walk outside and be more observant of the places that we live in and the products that we use in our everyday lives and analyze those. And we will see that it has always to do with equality, with gender, with climate, with justice, with biodiversity. It's all connected. And the whole school approach is saying, okay, we need to look at the curriculum. What are possibilities to engage with themes that allow for boundary crossing between different subjects? That is very important. We look at professional development of teachers. If you want to take the local environment more central in your teaching and learning, if you want to connect different disciplines, if you want to pay more attention to empathy, socio-emotional well-being, how do you do that as a teacher? Where do you learn that as a teacher? In in-service training and in pre-service training? How do we strengthen professional development? The third area would be, how can we make better connections between the school and the local environment and all the actors, the local government, small businesses, as Bas was already referring to for universities. Schools can do this too, through repair cafes, where young people fix vacuum cleaners or smartphones or computers or bicycles, and they work with local businesses that can maybe give a workshop on how to do that, and the physics teacher and the chemistry teacher and the economics teacher, they can all come in and bring in their expertise, so that you connect the school teaching and learning more with the outdoor and the out of school environment. Another area would be the school itself as a place where people eat, where people travel to, commute to, where people use energy, where they use water, where they create waste. How can you make it more circular? How can you make it more carbon neutral? How can the school itself become a living laboratory for sustainability? And engaging students in figuring that out together. And then another area would be pedagogy and teaching methods and approaches. There are all kinds of new forms of learning: experiential learning, social learning, transformative learning, inquiry-based learning, that we don't use enough, I think, in our schools. And it's been said, schools, teachers, they're busy, they're pressured. There's a lot of emphasis on testing and performativity. And there's not enough space for developing these new ways of thinking. So I'm not blaming teachers for not doing this. It is also a systemic structural problem that there is not enough space for doing this. I do hope that the curriculum new reform in the Netherlands will allow for a bigger percentage of the curriculum to be more localized, more place-based. That would really, I think, help. And teachers need to also have time and trust to experiment within their own classroom and in their own schools. This is very well developed in some of the Nordic countries where I am now. And in this project, there's a collaboration between the local university, the Life Sciences University of Norway, and 4 schools and the school district, where teachers work closely with researchers. Also heads of schools participate, coordinators in schools, sustainability coordinators. Every school has one of those. And some PhDs do their research, like Bas is also doing research within these new forms of teaching and learning. So it's very exciting. It's not a doom and gloom education as sustainability education is sometimes seen. It's innovative, it's creative, it energizes. So we try to also give it a more positive aura, get it out of the doom and gloom thinking, because it needs to be hopeful, as Greg pointed out as well.
Thank you.
So it's exciting.
Yeah, that does sound exciting, and thank you so much for giving some concrete examples.
Yeah, and Leren voor Morgen, the cooperative for our education for sustainability in the Netherlands, has an excellent site also on the whole school approach to sustainability. And I recommend that you have a look at that. It's very concrete, and I do think that we're actually beginning to see schools in Holland, in primary and secondary schools, education, that are making progress in no longer seeing sustainability as something to add on It's something that requires a whole system redesign.
Yes, exactly. That needs to be structural and integrated. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your really interesting and thoughtful contribution. I would like to give an opportunity to anybody in the audience who's got a question for our panelists, or perhaps for Camelia or other people from Teachers for Climate. Frank can, Frank can come to you with the microphone, and perhaps you could introduce yourself before you ask your question. This is Frank from Teachers for Climate, by the way. Does anybody have a question?
Yes, a question at the back. No, sir.
Okay. Yeah. You have any sound? Yes? Okay. Please introduce yourself.
Yep. So my name is Wouter. I work at Stichting Technotrend. We make sustainability education in that sense. And I was wondering also, I think almost a year ago, I had an online conference also with Arjen and Wals. And we talked also about this whole kind of like critical thinking and problematizing and like destructurizing like this kind of thinking, what we also need to do, especially if you want to set these big transitions. Like normally we do focus a lot on hope and creating like new kind of innovation. So we're all about that. But how do you get this kind of mindset of this critical thinking in there, and like also get the other side into the classroom without losing touch of hope?
What's your question for?
Anybody who would like to answer?
Well, if it's okay for the others, I'll give a first shot, and then please feel free to add to that. I think a part of that answer lies in the pedagogies that you use, and also the mindset that you yourself bring as a facilitator of that type of learning, or in the words of McIntyre, as a transgressive gardener that you bring to tend that soil. You need to also keep that in mind, you know, that critical aspect, and capture yourself. It's very easy to fall into those types of cognitive distortions where you think, okay, this is the problem, this is going to be the solution. And most of these challenges, if not all of these challenges, are complex, wicked problems, which is a bit unfortunate because our psychology isn't really designed by evolution to deal with that type of complexity, or at least maybe as children, but we unlearn how to do that to a large extent. So first, being conscious and aware of those traps yourself would be a great place to start. And then a way to facilitate that is by choosing the methodologies and the pedagogies that you use to work on those types of challenges. And particularly in design studies and design research, there's a lot of approaches that are emerging that are really quite good at that. So stuff like speculative design, transition design, regenerative design, they all include numerous times where you can do that. And then the third would be to bring a transdisciplinary team whenever possible. So that's not just teachers, not just the same type of teachers, but as many people as possible that can actually trigger and reflect on the blind spots that you may have, which are all things that we don't do enough of in education.
I can say something. Oh.
Yes, please, Greg.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the key things is, you know, this radical transformation, because a lot of times this aspect of fatalism is so prevalent, especially, sorry about that, within the, I can say it definitely within the United States and other places. But it's this aspect of trying to figure out, you know, one of the aspects of Freirean eco-pedagogy is this aspect of trying to have these generative themes, these aspects of how do we learn through what the students really care about, their own meaning, the local context, and how can we understand, how can we teach and also learn from them that these themes that we discuss, the problem posing that we discuss through the materials, that we teach through that, and we learn through them also. And it's this aspect of, you know, much of what Arjen was saying, this aspect that de-skilling of teachers and, you know, this accountability and efficiency, and it's really hard with teachers. And it's this aspect of the having less and less time to teach. I'm not sure in the Netherlands, but in Los Angeles, 1/3 of teachers after they graduate from somewhere like UCLA, that's a very progressive, quit teacher within a year or two. So it's this aspect of, you know, how can we teach through what's meaningful to the students? And just for 1 minute, there was this one, I organized a Frere group in Sweden, in Gothenburg, maybe about 10 years ago. And one professor had students from Chicago. It was a project, and it was a bunch of students, high school students that couldn't, that was going to fail out of and not graduate because they are failing math. And he went in with, and he asked students, you know, what is most concerning of you? And they said, unfortunately, in the United States, gun violence and sexually transmitted diseases. And what he did was he restructured the entire class to look through mathematics, you know, where is your neighborhood? Why is there more, say, liquor stores in this part of the town other than this other part of town? Where it's mostly the white population compared to minority populations? What are the histories from that, using statistics and all these different aspects? And the students ended up doing advanced mathematics well beyond what they needed to graduate. So a lot of it is this aspect of trying to teach through what's meaningful to the students. But like Arjen and many other people talk about, which is happening, that the teachers have less and less time, at least in the United States and other places, Latin America too, have less and less time because of standardization, neoliberal principles, all these different aspects. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hear you. I don't think there's one teacher anywhere in the Netherlands that wouldn't say that time is the biggest issue to being able to do their job well. And I really like how you give that example of making meaningful education by also creating an authentic context. Thank you so much. There's another question from Mark.
Well, we have some students up here from Youth for Climate, and they research that lots of students don't experience the education as relevant. So I am very curious how, well, we are just at the start of reforming our education in Holland. I'm really curious for your opinion about the plans over here.
That's quite a difficult question. I think it's definitely really necessary to make some radical changes. So I totally agree with all of you with your model, how you stage all parts. But I also have a few questions, maybe. I experience eco-anxiety myself, and it gets worse and worse whenever I learn more about it. Shouldn't there be more? It's maybe a bit too specific, but I think it's really important if you learn children and youth about such big problems, but also small ones, mostly big problems. How do you make sure those children won't get too overwhelmed with information they might not be prepared for? At least I think I was a bit sensitive maybe, but as a child I couldn't sleep anymore if I would have heard all of these things. So I think the focus should be on not making people feel powerless, because I think that's the most important part as a perspective from the children, not from the teacher, of course. I cannot talk about that, but.
Thank you so much, Isabel, because I think your question is really so important. And it's one that we as teachers are really asking ourselves every day. And I thank you for sharing. And I don't think you need to say that you're too sensitive, because if you hear in class that basically the world and your future is at stake, you don't need to be very sensitive. That's a very serious issue, and I think that's one that teachers struggle with every day. I'd like to talk about what we try to do as teachers, but I would really love to hear from some of our panelists, perhaps, if they have any ideas about that.
Yeah, if I may, I think these are difficult times. I think not just for younger generation, but they have longer to live on this earth, so they're more worried about it than maybe me, who I'm closing in on 60. Still, I might have 30 years on this planet. It is, I think it's really important, well, two things. One, it is sad that young people today learn more about climate urgency outside of schools than inside of schools. Second, I think when people are uncomfortable and anxious about these questions and matters, it's very important to be uncomfortable and anxious together and not alone. So the power of social networks and movements is very important here. And I see the climate strike, Fridays for Future movements there, and Extinction Rebellion. These are social networks and movements that provide psychological support, but they also can be empowering. So being part of those movements, I think, is very important. Then maybe what is also important is that you look for those, you look for action in your own, what is in your own control, I think. Same for teachers who are in these very complex, somewhat dysfunctional structures. There is some control over your own classroom, the pedagogical spaces and environment that you can create in your own classroom. Same for young people they also have agency. They can make choices, critical choices, and be disruptive, even going against the normalized and making the common less common and the ordinary less ordinary by asking questions and difficult questions also to adults. But also, some people make choices to become vegan or become vegetarian. Some people make choices not to get a driver's license. And so there you see all kinds of movements in society that I think show the possibility. These are niches that I think are gaining strength, and I'm an optimist. I think the glass is half full and not half empty. I see a lot of niches and movements that are working towards change, and it starts small, and it's getting more and more traction. And I think the youth strike movement is a climate strike movement. It should get a Nobel Peace Prize, because I think it is making a big impact. So I hope that young people will be inspired and will become more engaged. And I also hope that schools will see that there's so much learned within such a movement. And there's a lot of informal learning taking place that in a way needs to be upgraded, needs to be recognized. And I think some deschooling may be needed to allow for that to happen.
Thank you very much. And there's a big pat on the back for Isabel, because Isabel is actually one of those people, and Bart, who are organizing these climate strikes. So you guys... One final question from Vince.
Yes, hi. I'm Vince. I'm a geography teacher in Utrecht, and I recognize that having the time to do something with your curriculum is essential. And we got the opportunity through Utrecht municipality we had an impulse subsidy type of thing. And with the geography department, we took it upon ourselves to do a MAD project, which is revise the whole geography curriculum in the first and second year. And so we chose to make 3 modules on climate crisis, on ecological crisis, and the third one is on linear to circular economy. And I'm interested in this thing with hope, because it's also, I found in writing, but also in teaching, that you can also from presenting the facts as they are. I mean, in a way, the situation is not that hopeful. We're surrounded with posters that say, or the Extinction Rebellion people say, where hope dies, action begins. And I see also that painting raw facts in class activates people, but then it makes other people not activated. So maybe this is not as uniform as we may think it is. So how is there research on what hope or a lack of hope does to kids? And I mean, the 60% figure is crazy, but maybe that's necessary in a way.
Oh, such a good question, so much to say. Bas, you would like to start?
Okay,
I think Greg, you can go ahead.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. I just have to get off of the call, so I apologize. I just have another meeting that's coming up. But I just wanted to say, and I'm sorry for butting in, but I think the aspect is, I think the last two questions were great. I think the aspect of hope, there is a lot of research out there on this aspect of what does fatalism has done to education. You know, someone like Michael Apple talks a lot about this aspect of, even in the first couple of days in kindergarten, a student can internalize if they're a good or bad student. And it continues with this aspect where Freire talks about, you know, that we continue, that education, especially banking education, just a teacher telling the students what to think, how to think, and things like that, is just fatalistic. It's just reproducing the oppressions. And I think, I mean, one of the key things too is that education should not be free of conflict, or I would argue a lot of times it should be uncomfortable too. And that a lot of times we very much push too much. Well, we shouldn't have conflict. We shouldn't have uncomfortable students within the classroom. But it's this aspect that, you know, conflict is good. It's just when conflict leads to violence, the essence of, you know, peace education, that's when it becomes problematic. So I think a lot of these aspects is, you know, when the discussions and true understandings come out in the classroom, and obviously it depends on the level of the student, it's coming from these discussions of, you know, the students, a lot of times, depending on their age and what they see, a lot of times they have a lot to say. Someone like the scholar Bell Hooks talks about how, you know, that creativity and criticalness is a lot of times beaten out of students, especially if they're considered bad students. You know, this aspect of, you know, if they're good students, you know, they're thinking outside the box and they're thinking about different situations. But if they're bad students, well, they're disrupting the classroom and things like that. So I think a lot of it is this aspect of, you know, like Arjen was saying, this aspect of unlearning is just as important as learning. And also, I like the word deschooling. I'm not sure if that's coming from Ivan Ilyich, but this aspect of which a lot of people consider as the first pedagogue, eco-pedagogue, this aspect of really radically changing the politics, the aspect, the system changes. And my last thing just is this aspect, a lot of times, my research in Latin America and in the Appalachia region was this aspect of questioning, can the system itself, you know, teach to also, you know, critique itself? Because if school is a part of the system, then, you know, how does that all come about? So education, not just formal education, but informal and public pedagogy, all those different things, and all the literacies, internet literacies, and things like that. So I just wanted to share that, and I apologize that I do have to get off the phone, but it was wonderful, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to leave now, and you told us, and we ran out of time, but thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, and looking to work with everyone again.
I'm sorry.
And keep in touch. Thank you.
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you so much. I will now give the word to Bas.
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to give you a big compliment, actually, for taking on that journey. So I think it's not easy to do, and also extend help if our research center can help in any way with that. Please do let us know. And to come back to your question, like, there's a lot of differences between individual humans, right? Some of us were more predisposed predisposition to take action. Others require hope, and others require conflict to do so. So there will always be some variation between people and how they respond. Perhaps my response is I'm a bit allergic to dichotomies. So whenever someone presents me with one, I'm always like, no, well, what's the end-end solution? So perhaps we need both conflict and hope. But more importantly, when you are dealing with such complex issues that are also emotional, like these are difficult topics to deal with, that also places a burden of responsibility on us as educators or on school systems to facilitate enough support to psychologically and embodically engage with that. So maybe that means that the school should have eco-psychologists, for example, as part of their staff who support teachers like you who have to present some pretty intense or maybe even destructive facts. So that would be my direction of thinking. Yeah.
I like that. I've never heard that, ecological psychologist. Yeah, I think it's very important. With pain in my heart, I have to say we totally ran out of time for our panel discussion, but I decided to let it go a little bit longer because I really valued your questions and indeed your answers very much. I would like to propose, therefore, that we combine the ball and the little workshop element we had planned, because the purpose of our workshop element was really, we know who you are and you have so much to contribute, and we would really like to for you to have the opportunity to get to know each other and to share inspiration, because very much like Camelia said, our model is not another model to say, here teachers, this is something else you have to do. It really is. We know there is so much already happening. And my question to you would be, is there something that in the course of this evening you're like, right, that's something we do, or I've seen that done, or this is something I'm going to do? Can you introduce yourself to somebody you haven't met yet, or you've heard them explain what they do and think, right, great, I want to hear more about that? And share something that you do or that your school does that fits within the model, or anything part of the discussions we've heard this evening. So meet somebody you haven't met before, share something you do that fits in the whole discussion about transformative sustainability education. I would really like to thank very much our panelists, Arjen, Wals. Thank you so much.
Graag gedaan en goede voortzetting. En jammer dat ik de borrel mis. Ik vind het is moeilijk een goede borrel hier te krijgen in Noorwegen, heb ik al ontdekt. In ieder geval kost het een heleboel geld. Maar ik ga een poging wagen. Bedankt en tot een volgende keer.
Wijsheid. Thank you. Bas, we are lucky that you are here with us. But I really would like to thank you very much for your contribution. Yes. Thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge. Carlos, thank you so much.
Wieneke, bedankt.
Dankjewel aan onze cameravrouw Marliese. Borreltijd.